welcome back. So I have potentially the most useful lesson so far. So if you've noticed, many of the verbs we've talked about, they all have very similar endings. For example, something for the I form, the eu form, eu falo, I talk, it ends with an O. Eu acho, I think, it ends with an O. Eu bebo, I drink, it ends with an O, right? So I've gone through a bunch of verbs so far in all these lessons, and obviously I'm not going to go through all the verbs and all the words. So I'm going to teach you how to memorize the verb endings so that if you see a verb that you don't know that we haven't talked about yet, let's say trabalhar, to work, right? It ends with an AR. So for AR verbs, what is the pattern that follows? For ER verbs, for IR verbs, what are the patterns that follow? So you can conjugate verbs that we haven't talked about, because like I said, we're not going to talk about all the verbs. So let's get to it. Okay, so for AR verbs, like I have some listed here: comprar, cantar, sentar, fechar, chegar, aceitar, right? So comprar is to buy. Yikes, why is that not working? To buy. Cantar is to sing. Sentar is to sit. Fechar, close. Chegar is arrive. Aceitar is to accept, right? So all of these are regular verbs, as we say, right? They're irregular verbs that have strange conjugation patterns, and then there are regular verbs, which are the majority, right? So what I want to teach you is that for all of these verbs, these regular verbs, all the endings are pretty much the same. So if I show you here for comprar, to buy, right? So eu compro, você compra, nós compramos, vocês compram. Okay, so by giving you that information, how can you conjugate these? Well, I'll tell you what, it's very simple. It's the same thing. So, compro, canto, sento, fecho, chego, aceito. For all of these verbs, they all end in AR, right? They all have the same conjugation pattern. They're all conjugated the same exact way. Okay? So, you just learned 6 verbs right off the bat. And I'll tell you what, for most verbs, that is how you do it. Now, one way to tell if a verb is irregular or not is that normally, like very short verbs, like what I mean is like if it's like 3 or 4 letters long, usually those are irregular, right? So I'll give an example like dar, right? To give, dar. We're not going to talk about that now, but I just want to explain that that is not conjugated this way. So usually a word that has multiple syllables, comprar, cantar, sentar, fechar, blah, blah, blah. Those can be conjugated this way. Usually a word that is very short, a verb that is very short, has an irregular conjugation pattern. So keep that in mind. Okay? Okay, so now let's talk about the ER verbs. Here's some right here. Vender, to sell. Escrever, to write. Beber, to drink. We already learned that. Aprender is to learn. Vender, escrever, beber, aprender. I have an example here for you for the conjugation pattern. Eu vendo, você vende, nós vendemos, vocês vendem. Okay, so if I give you these conjugation patterns, how can you conjugate all of these in the LE form? Well, like this. Follow the pattern. Vende, escreve, bebe, aprende. So for the previous slide, when I conjugate everything, I used the eu form, right? Eu compro, blah, blah, blah. Now, just to show you an example, I'm using the você, ela form, right? They're all the same. I could easily conjugate all of these in the nos form. Vendemos, escrevemos, bebemos, aprendemos. All the same thing, right? So I'm just trying to show you the pattern. So here we have the IR verbs, and there's much less IR verbs than AR, ER. So I can only give you 2 examples that fit the mold because many IR verbs are irregular, right? So for these, right, abrir is to open, and partir is to leave. Now there's a couple ways of saying to leave. Partir is, you know, probably the second most common way of saying behind the verb sair, right? So partir, you would probably use that like if you're at the airport or a bus station. Eu parto. I'm leaving. I leave the bus station. I'm going away from the bus station, right? So, abrir, partir. Let me read this for you. Eu abro. Você abre. Nós abrimos. Vocês abrem. So, let's start. Eu abro, we know that, right? And the other one would be parto. Abre, parte, right? So it's all following the same pattern. So there's your tip, right? That's the new thing you learned today. So for regular verbs, and usually regular verbs are pretty easy to distinguish because usually they're the longer verbs, right? So if you have a short verb, like I said, that's 3 or 4 letters, many times that'll be irregular. That's a good way of thinking about it. So normal, regular verbs all follow the same conjugation patterns that I just gave you. So they go by AR verbs, ER verbs, and IR verbs. Follow the pattern, you'll be able to conjugate all of them successfully without a problem. And all of these patterns also work for different tenses, past tense, future, that kind of thing. So, of course, there are different endings for those, but in most cases, those endings will be the same across that verb type, that verb family, AR, ER, IR. Okay, so I hope you guys learned a lot today. Like I said in the beginning, this is probably the most important lesson, or the most illuminating lesson so far, because you literally just learned how to speak hundreds of verbs right off the bat, because the conjugation patterns are all the same. So hopefully it was helpful. You guys have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.